Question. Having read the affidavit, doesn't it feel like the cops played mind games with us?
That's a yes or no question.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. They had so many cards, they knew so much so early, and yet let on so little for so long. So let me ask another question. Did the cops ever provide a layout of the house? Did they actually want us to know who slept where? I mean, didn't all of us understand the surviving roommates both slept on the ground floor? And we only started to question that when body cam showed up on the Truth and Transparency channel. That was on December 19, barely 2 weeks ago now, clearly showing Dee's bedroom was empty. And that was, I think, on September 1st. And so we wondered, well, did she move in there later or was it occupied later? And it turned out it wasn't. And so based on this tweet, a lot of us felt the same way. Once you realize the layout of the house and the two surviving roommates were all on the ground floor, well, it's not that strange that they didn't hear anything. Well, except that it would be. If someone was directly above you in a creaking house, you would hear them anyway. So let that be a lesson to us looking on, that the cops may play dumb enough to really piss Kaylee's dad, Steve Gonzalez, off.
You've managed to piss off every single one of them.
That was the plan.
Not a great plan.
Based on where we are now, do you think it was a great plan? Do you think the FBI and the Moscow PD, do you think they think it was a well-executed investigation? Do you agree with what they say when they say, we wished we'd come forward about what we knew about the Elantra much earlier? So I want to deal with the media narrative, how the cops played mind games with Kohberger, and as well as with us, and then also deal with the merits of the case. If Xana was awake, wasn't Ethan awake? And if Xana and Ethan were awake, wasn't Dee as well? That's already 3 people that are awake. And technically, aren't we dealing with a situation where Dee heard Kaylee say, there's someone here, meaning there's someone in the house? So wasn't Kaylee awake before the crime as well? And wasn't Maddie awakened by Kaylee telling her that as well? And so wasn't everyone awake? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Thank you to the hundreds, thousands of you who have subscribed. You'll notice we take the investigation seriously. We try to think intelligently about it, and I will be doing in a follow-up to this analysis, I will be providing the TCRS hypothesis. What was the motive? What need does he serve by killing? I'll be providing a hypothesis and an answer to that question. So look out for that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So if you think back, and it's important that we do, if you go into the rearview mirror of this case and you say, what did we know? What was the first thing that we knew about this case? Well, wasn't it that everyone was asleep and everyone was killed in their beds, and that the killer sort of went in and came out, and it was this incredibly calculated precision assassination, right? And we were all terrified by that, but at the same time we were thinking, how on earth do you actually do this? How do you manage to, with a knife, kill 4 people consecutively without waking anyone up and without causing any noise? And there was this impression that somehow he had succeeded in this. And I suppose you could say they were sound asleep, or they were so inebriated that that worked to his advantage. Did that really play out ultimately? So if we go to the narrative in the affidavit, it states the following. Dee stated, the surviving roommate, that she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the 2nd floor. Well, that's stated in an affidavit. We were never told that. Dee stated that she was woken at about 4 a.m. by what she said sounded like Kaylee playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Now, I think what that suggests is she heard the dog moving and assumed Kaylee was doing something with it. I suppose it could also be the killer may have put the dog in that bedroom. Maybe the dog was actually sleeping in the lounge. In any event, Dee heard the dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and now we know it was Kaylee's vacant bedroom located on the 3rd floor. A short time after hearing the dog, she said she heard what she thought was Kaylee saying something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Now, doesn't it make sense? If Dee heard dog sounds, didn't Kaylee hear dog sounds as well, but closer to them, and probably perhaps heard a door opening and closing and also footsteps? The affidavit refers to there's someone here possibly being, I think, Kernodal saying that, or that someone who was here was Xana. And we do know that Xana was ambulance. She did go to the door to get a food delivery. And so in the same way, we don't know exactly what the affidavit's referring to or who is being referred to there. Well, neither did the residents inside the house. Someone's walking around. Who is it? Is it something to be concerned about, or isn't it? Well, what do you normally do in that situation? If you're scared, you might not call out. If you aren't scared but you're concerned, well, maybe you might say, "Who's there?" So another insight, and we don't know this for sure, sometimes apps activate, you don't necessarily need to be using them, but it did appear that Xana was on TikTok at 4:12 a.m. And, if she'd made a food order, you would imagine by like 10 minutes later, she would have finished eating and sort of done the last bit of social media, looking at her phone before settling in, before going to sleep. And so if you accept that, wasn't everyone awake? Dee, Xana, if Xana was awake, what about Ethan? Was Kaylee not awake to say there's someone here? And if she said it to Madison, wasn't Madison awake as well? So in other words, wasn't everyone awake? All 4 of the victims, the dog and one of the survivors, at least one of the survivors. And doesn't that change a lot? I mean, it's one thing to commit a crime in a house that sleeps 6, while they're all very definitely, very obviously asleep. And one of the mistakes I think I made was you sort of imagine it's very simple. The killer's on the outside, he sees all the lights in the house going out, oh, everyone's asleep, and then he makes his move. Well, that wasn't the sort of house where all the lights do go out. There's some lights that remain on. For example, those in the kitchen. For example, those in the lounge. For example, even those in the bedroom, the good vibes light. And so, obviously, it's quite another thing to commit a crime when everyone isn't very definitely, very obviously asleep, and then run into obvious problems, such as being seen and intercepted in the middle of committing your crime. Do you remember ABC7 saying earlier reports said the victims were likely sleeping? However, new court records show that Xana was likely awake during the 25-minute window. So, do you notice in hindsight how misled we were by reports that A, everyone was asleep, when we know Xana was answering the door as late as 4 a.m., and D could also hear noises throughout all of this, and then B, everyone was killed in their beds. That was the other thing we were misled about. On the issue of the cops not having a suspect, well, actually they had an eyewitness inside the house, not just since day 1, but minute 1. They had his bushy eyebrows, they had his height, his build, his dress code, his shoes, and presumably his shoe size as well, and even the car he was driving, the color of the car, the make of the car. Can you see just how much they had and just how dumb they played it?
Now been 3 days since 4 University of Idaho students were found dead inside an off-campus home.
So Tim Channing, Moscow police sent us 2 updates yesterday. The first one here said police did not find a weapon at the house, but they believe a knife was used to kill the 4 students. The second update here was a plea for patience, saying they told us as much as they can at this point. So here's a breakdown of everything they have told us. Just before noon on Sunday, police got a call for an unconscious person. When they showed up, they found the 4 bodies of University of Idaho students. Again, they did not find a weapon at the scene, and they do not have a suspect. That evening, officers called Latah County Coroner Kathy Mabbitt to the house. She says in her 16 years as coroner, she's seen multiple victim homicides twice, but never seen 4 victims at the same crime scene.
Well, there was a lot of blood. It was, it's a very sad scene.
She's also waiting on toxicology reports. Mabbitt says those could take 4 to 6 weeks to come back, but she does not think that report will change the manner or cause of death. Moscow police, though, say they think this was an isolated, targeted incident and say there is no threat to the rest of the community.
So what you get from that is the idea the inference really that the police are making, that this was an isolated incident, that there weren't other crimes that had occurred. In other words, this isn't a serial killer. Wasn't that based on what appeared to be a very amateurish thing? And why did they know that? Well, because they know what Dee told them. I saw him. I interrupted him. And that's one of the dumbest mistakes a serial killer can make. It's also not the kind of thing a seasoned veteran mastermind criminal would do. Another thing missing from that statement is, what about DNA? We are waiting 4 to 6 weeks for the results of the DNA testing to come back. Do you remember when the CSIs went into the house and they were asked, well, what's going on there? They didn't say a word to the media. What are they supposed to say? Oh, we do have some DNA traces. We're just checking on them. Now, this statement that there was no threat to the community as early as November 16, just 3 days after the incident, it didn't make any sense. Unless they knew they had his DNA from day one and they were playing mind games with the community. Saying there's no threat implies the killer was someone inside the house, as we saw in the John Benet Ramsey case, maybe even implying that they thought that the killer was one of the survivors, I guess. We do know that the cops gave their first press conference on November 17, and they played dumb about the Elantra during that as well. It seems they only announced they were searching for it on December 7th, when they had already found it on November 29th. And then think about the other thing. Wasn't Murphy awake as well? If Kaylee and Maddie woke up, perhaps because of the dog, it was too late for them to escape the situation. It was just prior to the perpetrator entering the room and attacking them. But it wasn't too late for one or both to attempt to defend themselves. But that attack also woke up and activated the dog. I think the dog was actually already activated, but it activated the dog even more. The dog would have known something is going down that's not good. I can hear small, muffled sounds of pain from my owner and from her friend. When the killer descended downstairs, of course, Dee was awake as well. So Dee must have heard scuffling upstairs and then movements up and down the stairs. So doesn't it seem if everyone, but perhaps not B, was awake, not necessarily wide awake or sober, but conscious? The most conscious of all the victims was possibly Zaina, who had to get up and go to the door, and who was actively on TikTok barely 5 minutes before the attack. No wonder the criminal genius cut and ran halfway through the incident. It was all falling apart around him. But another issue this raises is, did the killer not know that Dee saw him? Did their eyes not lock at some point? So to summarize, Kohberger was not anticipating, number one, anyone waking up at 4 a.m., number two, a DoorDash delivery at 4 a.m. I mean, who would imagine that? Number three, a dog barking. And number four, probably the presence of Ethan in the house. Thanks, S.M. Kovalinsky, for that shortlist. Now, I am going to take this analysis a little bit further, and I want to reveal something that is really shocking when you drill down into these details. We're also going to map the crime scene. I'll probably do that in a live stream, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.